Good afternoon. I'm Vince Velazquez, and welcome to Law&Crime Network's Keeping the Peace, where from a law enforcement perspective, we're tackling today's important issues relating to social justice and law enforcement reform. With the outcry for justice for Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and so many more, the death of Tony McDade is being re-examined. McDade, a black transgender man, was killed during an altercation with police on May 27th. Let's take a look.
Y'all just killed that man for no reason. Man, that's messed up. That's crazy. Don't fucking shoot him, you fucking ignorant ass crackers. Don't you shoot him. Get me some over the fucking window. Do not shoot him. Come on, man, that's crazy. Y'all taking us out for what? No. That man didn't.
You know, it doesn't matter what video we see. Anytime you see any video dealing with a citizen encounter like that, it's hard to watch, but we're going to talk about it. Joining me today, I have two special guests. First, we have Adam Lee, Lieutenant Colonel, Fulton County, Georgia Sheriff's Department. Has a lot of experience in law enforcement. Prior to that, he was a commander in Atlanta Police of the Major Crime Section. And Linda Kenny Bodden, who is an attorney extraordinaire. Welcome to the show, both of you.
Thanks, Vince.
Thank you.
So I want to start with you, Linda. You know, when we look at a photo or a video like this, and we're looking at everything that's going on in the country now, in Black Lives Matter movement, and somehow we haven't seen a lot of conversation about the LGBTQ community. And this is an instant where, you know, this matters as well. And there is a little controversy with what happened with this particular victim. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, Vince, let me just tell you, having represented a police officer in New Jersey who was transgendered at the time, she was treated terribly by her department and was pushed out, eventually had to sue. And of course, we ended up winning. So what you're talking about is the systemic and discrimination when somebody is different, okay? And if it's occurring against a police officer in their own unit, you know it could be occurring when they meet other people. And that's the problem. Now, the commander may not have much of a problem because I understand that Fulton County, Georgia does do and is very, very aggressive in dealing with excessive force, the prosecutor there. But in other communities, that's simply not the case, Vince.
No doubt. And Adam, you know, she makes a good point. As a commander, someone who commanded a unit that investigates homicides, police officer shootings, I can't remember a time when we had a case that was charged like this. And then we're looking at a subset of a community that we don't hear a lot about. People, you know, it's kind of getting lost in the movement, so to speak. How should this case be handled any differently than just to say a person that has a police encounter, you know, in a regular day-to-day, everyday city kind of scenario?
When in this particular case, you have a transgender person that was involved, and we all know that there are certain prejudices that exist with, like the attorney just said, within law enforcement agencies, because law enforcement agencies have hired individuals from the LGBT community, and so there has always been a difficulty, if you will, in accepting individuals for that lifestyle. So we have to go above and beyond to ensure that there are no biases, especially within the police departments, because I could see the day could come when we could have a hate crime charge against an officer if it could be shown that the officer committed the act, which could have been a crime, against someone who was transgender or had a different gender identity.
In this case, Tony McDade is definitely a victim, but this has a little bit of different twist to it because the Tallahassee Police Department has delayed naming the officer who shot and killed Tony McDade. This is a reversal from the city's announcement last week that they would be releasing the ID of the officer. Now, the police union had a lot to say about why they think the officer's name should not be released. Let's take a look.
Hours after a Tallahassee police officer shot and killed Tony McDade on May 27th, Police Chief Lawrence Revel said he would not release the officer's name.
The officer is a victim just like anybody else in these type of cases, so Marcy's Law definitely kicks in, and the officer is afforded the same rights as any other victim.
Citing a law designed to protect victims of crime, the department says that officer became a victim when McDade pointed a gun at them at the Leon Arms apartment complex on Holton Street.
Interesting, very interesting. So we have a police department that, you know, they want to be transparent, but they don't want to release the officer's name, claiming that the officer is a victim himself, i.e. having to have shot Mr. McDade to prevent himself from being injured, an aggravated assault victim. Linda, let me start with you. You're an attorney. When we look at why an officer would consider that, or a police department would consider that, why not be transparent?
There's no reason, and this is quite frankly doggy doo-doo. Okay, Marcy's Law was never intended to cover a police officer who, in their line of duty, shot somebody dead. Okay, that was simply to be the case. And all you're doing is fomenting racism. You're preventing more discrimination against the LGBT community. It is ridiculous. As a matter of fact, if you release the officer's name, maybe you find other incidents with other people on the street and say, hey, that was the person that went after X, or that was the person that went after Y. It's no different than how cops for years had the perp walk, right? Perp walk, find out, oh my God, look at that person. That was the person who raped me. And so if you release the name, you may find other incidents.
Well, that's a great point, Linda, because I'm going to go back to Adam here in a second. So when I was working cases, that's exactly what happened. If we release a suspect's photograph and ID, we had victims that would then call the police department and says, hey, by the way, that person that you showed on TV did this to me. And then we start seeing a pattern. Adam, you work criminal major case crimes for decades. Isn't that the case? I mean, why would we not want to release an officer's name? What difference does it make?
It's absolutely the case. I think there's an ulterior motive here with this agency, though. They may not be wanting to release a name to protect the officer against maybe a possible retaliation by a citizen, a private citizen, a vigilante type situation. That's the only thing that I can imagine. The only reason why I can imagine why they may not want to release his name, just to protect him and his household, if you will, his family or whatever, from any retaliatory actions. That's about it.
No doubt, no doubt. Interested. We'll keep following that. But new information has surfaced that suggests George Floyd and Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin, get this, may have had prior interactions while working together at a local nightclub. When we come back from the break, we'll get into it. Welcome back. A co-worker of George Floyd and Derek Chauvin has spoken out. David Pinne, who worked security with both men, now claim they knew each other and they bumped heads. Let's take a look at the video.
What kind of history?
They bumped heads.
How?
It has a lot to do with Derek being extremely aggressive within the club with some of the patrons, which was an issue.
The Floyd family says it believes what happened on May 25th was in part personal. Is there any doubt in your mind that Derek Chauvin knew George Floyd?
No, he knew him.
Whoa. Game changer. Linda, got to go straight to you. I mean, does this mean murder one if they can substantiate that this is a fact?
Yeah, it goes from, hey, maybe this is third degree to second degree to first degree murder. If indeed he knew him, and even if Mr. Floyd didn't recognize Chauvin, given like, for instance, his mugshot looks so different than his police uniform, but that would explain certainly why that knee didn't come off that neck ever, and he just looked up as if, I got you. If that's the case, game changer, Vince, you are absolutely right.
Yeah, I would agree. And I've thought that, okay, can we get to a murder one charge on this? The fact that he sat there with this I don't know what, I don't even have the words to describe the look on his face, disdain for life. Adam, when we worked cases back in the day and we look at what is in a murderer's eyes, his intent, his heart, and we know in our state, it's murder. We don't have degrees of murder, but we have to prove, that they had malice in their heart. If they had a prior, issue with each other while working, what steps you think the police should be looking at right now to try to connect those dots to see if, in fact, Derek Chauvin had malice in his heart?
They need to be interviewing everyone that worked at that club. Hello, can you hear me now? You hear me?
Go ahead. We got you.
Okay. They need to be interviewing everyone that worked at that club during the time period that Mr. Floyd was, I guess, employed as security, and the officer was employed off duty as security as well. Everyone needs to be spoken to. Everyone, even patrons who may have been regulars to the club that might be able to identify the relationship. This is certainly the avenue to go from the second degree to the first degree. That any relationship that was be considered a bad relationship, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good point to see if you can create a nexus between the relationship between Derek Chauvin and George Floyd. As it appears right now, they weren't total strangers. And we know all 4 officers were arrested. They all had high bail. And yesterday, one of the junior officers involved in the death of George Floyd, Thomas Lane, was released from jail on bond. Previously, his attorney, Errol Gray, did an interview with CNN defending his client. Let's take a look.
If they saw the full body camera on my client, I believe that they would have a different opinion, particularly if they had any knowledge of what police procedure is and how they should proceed on a felony arrest, particularly when the individual they are arresting is under the influence of some kind of drug. He did everything that he thought he was supposed to do, and he did more than that. He went into the ambulance, and he's the one that was doing CPR. He's a man of compassion. If all of these people say, why didn't my client intercede? Well, if the public is there and they're so in an uproar about this, they didn't intercede either. And my client's down where he can't really see.
Hold on, Counselor, hold on.
Yes,
2 things. One,
yes.
You're laying on a man's legs. You've got a fine view of what's going on with that man. The other officer is literally a foot in front of you on his neck. 2, I understand that he has a senior officer telling him what to do, but there's also a duty to intervene. And if you think an officer is doing something that's dangerous to a civilian, you have a duty to intervene. And he did not intervene. And the idea that the civilians should have rushed in to a policing situation in the inner city of Minneapolis against 4 police officers that have weapons and are kneeling on the neck of a man, don't you think that's asking a little much of civilians and a little too little of your client?
Absolutely. I just brought that up.
Wow, what a wild claim. So, Adam, I'm going to go straight to you now. What do you think would happen, knowing what we've seen on this video, if any of those civilians would have intervened at the moment that Derek Chauvin will not take his knee off of George Floyd's neck? What do you think would have happened?
George Floyd wouldn't have been the only victim on that scene if that had happened. We probably would have seen multiple casualties had the citizens intervened into that situation. I'm totally not buying this attorney's idea that the citizens should have protected George Floyd. The officer not doing anything, the young officer not doing anything, speaks to the culture of this police department. I do believe he probably was afraid to take any physical action against his coworker, but that speaks to the culture, and it shows that this police agency has a major problem if a young officer is afraid to do the right thing at the right time.
Yeah, and I think it's preposterous to think what this attorney said, that we will now rely on civilians to save another civilian's life at the hands of police. I mean, I can't even understand that. Linda, as an attorney, is that something that they're even going to mount as a defense? Is that something that will be introduced as his defense, that the civilians should have intervened?
Well, I think he floated a balloon here. I mean, I agree. Adam, you and I agree. It goes to show how a civilian and a police officer can agree on something. Absolutely. But, you know, remember we had, Vince, the interview of the attorney with the Roddy Bryan, who represented in the Ahmaud Arbery case down in Georgia? Well, this guy was like, you know, the saying, hold my beer. Okay. I mean, if this is the defense he's going to give his client, I have a feeling somebody else would take over this case.
Yeah. No doubt, no doubt. And I have to ask you, Lynn, I'm going to stay with you for a second, because when I start thinking about what this officer's defense is going to be, he had only been on the job for 4 days. So as you know, and most defense attorneys do know, when we're looking at a defense on a police officer, we look at the reasonableness standard. And I know Graham v. Connor's case law that they've looked at in the past to see if a reasonable officer would have acted in a similar fashion. Do you think the defense is going to rely on the fact that this officer was only on the street for 4 days? He is not an average police officer as far as an equal training and experience, and therefore he knew no better and was just following the orders of a superior officer.
Well, it didn't work in Germany when we tried all of the Nazis after the war, and it didn't work in the My Lai massacre for those of us who remember that as we were growing up when a military unit killed people in Vietnam. So I'm not sure that's the great defense, that I'm just following office orders, because when someone says, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, he certainly had his hearing. There may be a different defense, but I'm not sure that's the good one.
Right, and that's just counterintuitive to think that you need training to act or react when someone is saying, I can't breathe. That's natural instinct. Adam, switching back to you, when you were investigating cases and commanding officers and literally running the units, real quick, just tell me, have you seen any case in your career, your 30-plus career, that's even remotely similar to this?
Not even remotely. I can't even... As hard as I try to remember anything like this, the closest I could come to it is cases where no one was killed. You know, there was someone injured, and you had to hold officers accountable for the actions of their coworkers when they sort of just lost it, basically, got too aggressive, got their egos involved in the situation, and those officers failed to pull their coworker off of another person. Those officers were usually held accountable when it came to an internal affairs investigation.
Yeah, no doubt. Those are good points. And even in my career, I've never seen a case like that. But we're going to continue looking at these cases because it's important that from a perspective of law enforcement, that we're given an unbiased look at it and looking at both sides of this thing. Linda, you brought up some really, really good points. Thank you for that. And Adam, similarly, with your vast law enforcement experience, we appreciate your input and your view. Folks, we're going to continue to cover the cases around the country. We're going to continue to talk about these cases that are so important and give an unbiased view and just let you know what we think. Thank you guys for joining us. We will be back tomorrow with more on some cases around the world.